Welcome to Clubs Made Meaningful from Susner. This is a show about building clubs that people love, where strategy, culture, and brand come together to create real belonging. Let's dive in.
Derek, welcome back. Just you and I today, taking a little break from the conversations with all of these experts that we've been having. And I think today it's the best time to talk about differentiation. What makes clubs different from the club down the street? We have lots of conversations through our diagnostic process in which we help clubs really understand what is their challenge, what is their opportunity. A lot of them come back to differentiation. How do we differentiate ourselves across all the local different clubs that are trying to compete with, whether it's we're a bundled community that's kind of going against the real estate market, or we're a traditional club in which we're just trying to vie for that next generation of members. It becomes a really interesting conversation. And so there's a bunch of questions that we'll walk through today, but I think that where I want to start is when we sit across the table from a club leader. When we do our initial conversations, we ask, what makes this club any different from the club closest to them? And they almost always give us generic answers. Do you see the opportunity to talk about how you're different as a communication challenge? Or do you see that as a signal in which the club lacks a more unique sense of identity around who they are versus how they communicate?
I think it's both. I think differentiation is one of the probably at least one of the three most important things when it comes to this clarity of identity. Some clubs, I think it is a communication challenge. I think some clubs know that they're unique and special. For whatever reason, they've been trained, or we as people default to those external, tactile, tangible things, and we differentiate based on what we have. And I think that that's when it's a communication problem. I think when it's a deeper identity problem is when they can't describe why what we have makes our members care.
If I was to, if someone were to pin me down and say, tell me the difference, how would you know if it was a communication challenge or a identity challenge? I'd say if I walk around the club and it doesn't feel special in any way, shape, or form, and it just feels like, a normal club. It just feels like a standard club. Nothing really unique happens. There's no unique experiences. There's no sense of, okay, this place has a different feel to it, and you can tell right when you walk in the door, or whether it's the art on the walls, or the way that you're greeted, or the events that you hold for your members. If none of that really feels special in any, different way, I'd say that's a lack of identity. There's really nothing unique going on here. And I go into that, not to say that that's a huge problem, but that doesn't help you differentiate. It's really hard to convince a new member what makes your club so much better than someone else is something in which the other club can claim as well. And where I get into, if it's just a communication challenge, I have a lot of people that come to me and they go, you just have to be there to feel it. You just have to kind of be there to sense it. And then I do go there, and it absolutely is true. It's like, wow, when you get on property, it's completely different, and it has this different vibe to it, and it feels special and it feels different. But it's hard to articulate that unless you're there. That's a communication challenge. So if it is special, and it's really hard to try to put it into language and visuals so that someone who isn't on property can understand it, that's where it's like, we need better communication because we have something great here. We just need to find a way to communicate it better. If there's really nothing special about the place, then that's an identity challenge where you just lack this sense of where are we going and what makes us different.
We talk about values and vision as part of a differentiator. Back to not so much the communication challenge, maybe, but or maybe it is. When you read a vision statement or a mission statement or a list of 12 core values, and it's all of the same ones that you tend to, see. Like it's usually integrity, innovation, or honesty. When you review a mission or a vision or a set of values, what are some cues to you that it could be a communication challenge or an identity challenge?
I don't want to sound like a broken record. It's the same thing
Yeah.
if I see that, because if someone's like, our mission is to make a great experience for our members. Well, every club wants to do that. If you show me a club that doesn't want to have a great experience for its members, I would love to meet that club. I'd actually be very interested in that club because they have a very differentiated mindset. But the idea is, if I look at those values and I look at that vision, I could probably bet you a lot of money that 95% of clubs' mission and vision is undifferentiated.
Yeah.
Does that mean that they don't have an undifferentiated experience? No. But that's where it gets into whether it's communication or it's identity, is if you're using your generic mission and vision statements as the guiding light to your generic experience, that's an identity problem because you're not really doing anything. If your mission and vision are, symbolic in which you don't actually use them and you have a really interesting, unique experience, and then you have these generic mission and vision statements, that's a communication problem. And I think that a lot of people look at guiding principles like that, mission, vision, and values, as the core for identity. And I think that might be true. To me, they're the core of communication because they are the foundation for how we communicate internally around who we are. Whether we know who we are or not is identity. And whether we can communicate that, it's a challenge for me.
Yeah, for sure.
When we talk to clubs, they tend to reach to the same things. And you kind of alluded to this, where they talk about, hey, we have great amenities. We have a great history. We have a welcoming culture. We have great service quality. All those things are the things that every club claims. I don't think we've ever had a conversation in which not a club hasn't called out one of those four things and to say, no, this really differentiates us. Our staff is really good. What separates a club who have actually earned real distinction in their marketplace when those things are things that anyone could claim those?
First of all, before I answer the question, I think one of the problems is this is a very Me Too industry. People are following the leaders. There's a few visionary clubs out there that are willing to challenge the norm and own who they want to be and are really true to themselves. And then there's a whole pack that says, well, we need to be like them. Look what they're doing. We need to be like them. So they're following, they're not leading. And by following, they're just replicating what was authentic to somebody else that probably isn't authentic to you. So when you say, like, we have all these great amenities, I almost want to say, so what? Or so that? Like, how do those tangible things translate to an emotional benefit to the very specific culture and membership at your club?
Right. I would say the exact same thing, just reworded, is our amenities, our history, our culture, our service all contribute to X experience. And I've been playing around with this idea of identity as an operating system. And I think that clubs need to adopt this because identity being your operating system, it's not your logo. Your logo doesn't matter. To say everything is focused on delivering on this specific uniqueness. That is where you really separate yourself. The one thing that I do say in our diagnostic process, which is the first step in our process in general, when a club comes to us and they say, hey, we think we have a challenge, the first process is to say, let's have a conversation. Let's go through this process to really figure out what that challenge actually is.
Yeah, the point that you made where it said all of these amenities create this certain kind of experience. And like you said, it's not the best experience. I would even say the filler, the word there isn't an adjective. It's not world class or industry leading or best or first or greatest or biggest or whatever. I think it's our club's experience. And then you have an opportunity to define exactly what that experience is. And maybe that takes more than a word. And that's part of this articulation. For somebody to have an identity, a true identity, it must be authentic. And so when you're describing a club that gets described by somebody from outside that club in the correct, not only in the correct way, but in the way that you want them to be thinking of you, then you're walking the walk. Then you're living the brand at all the touch points. For them, there's two sides of that. One is that club that other person that you're asking, the outsider, they've either heard of you and they're speaking to what they've heard about when I say, tell me about that other club, or they've experienced you. And
Right.
if their description is coming from their experience, like I said, then you're crushing it at walking the walk. Or if their description of you is less than positive, then you're reinforcing that as well. So, we talk about crafting perception and deciding what our reputation should be, what we want it to be. That's only the beginning of the process. Following through and delivering on that day after day, not when we know that somebody's on site to judge us or critique us, but just
Right.
because that's the way we are. That again, that's gold standard type of stuff that we're delivering.
I go through this process all the time with clubs, and the thing that I want clubs to understand is the first step. If someone were to say, how do I come up with my identity? How do I find my identity? And I would say, take your strategic plan. That can't be longer than one page. That can't be a 65-page document. And to say, take your 65-page strategic plan document and shrink it into one page and say, here's what our club is all about. And here's how we know it. And here's what we're going to do to make that even better over the next 10 years. And if you can do that, then you have a really strong argument for, okay, our club is moving forward. But if the truest test to differentiation is whether your competitors, in my mind, is whether your competitors, or maybe you call them comparative clubs, because I know clubs don't like to think of themselves as competing with each other, and that's totally fine. But you say, if the other clubs in your area agree with how you describe yourself, then where does identity actually come from? Is a great conversation. It doesn't come from, sitting in a boardroom and saying, I think we're this. It can start there, but how do you find your identity, or how do you discover that? In your opinion, is it something that is already existing, or is it people who are deciding who they want to become?
Boy, that's a tough question. That's where the hard work comes from. Most clubs that we talk to, they have an identity. It's already there. They haven't uncovered it. They haven't figured out how to articulate it. But if they're successful in any way, shape, or form, and members are coming there, they're doing something right. So there must be something there. At the same time, I think if we lean too hard into what's already there, then we risk doing things the same way because that's the way we've always done them. And so I do think there's an aspirational quality that's growth, that's continuous improvement type of mindset. So many of us say, we're going to be world class. And you're like, awesome. What's that look like? My favorite analogy is I've got buddies that say, next year I'm going to lower my handicap by 4 strokes. And I go, that's awesome.
Right.
How are you going to do that? And they go, well, what do you mean? I said, is it fitness, exercise, workouts, journaling, meditation? How are we going to get there? Are we just going to wish our way to world class? Are we just going to wish our reputation to be better? Are we just going to talk about how great we are? Or are we going to implement it? And what are some of those measuring ways that we can prove that we're on the right track?
We go into all these different things. And you know what? This is our podcast, so I can go off the rails a little bit. I'm allowed to do that. Going back to the whole golf analogy, I think is really interesting. I spent last weekend talking to a guy who's he's probably in his 50s, and we were talking about golf, and we were going through this, like, what do you want out of this? What do you want? And it came down to, it's funny because we were basically having this conversation. Why do you play golf, and what do you want to get better at? And he goes, I don't really even care if I score well, but if I have one awesome shot around, then I'm happy. And so he said, this year, instead of focusing on all the little things that make my scores better, I'm focusing on how to shot shape. I'm focusing on how to do some really cool things that get me out of weird situations, because that's what makes him happy. And I think I go back to clubs and say, it matters for you guys to be successful, but the benefit is you guys get to determine what success looks like, because you're crafting the future. You are building that. This is a club. This is not an organization in which you have shareholders and stock prices and you need to do all of those other things. You are investing in experience. You get to decide what that means. And that's what the opportunity just explodes when you realize that, like, everything you do operates at a loss because your end goal is to create something unique and fun and different. I wish that more clubs realize that they are in the business of experience rather than in the business of satisfaction. Those are different.
And that's what makes the club industry awesome. When we think of the retail clients that we work with or have worked with in the past, where they're trying to attract hundreds of thousands of consumers or customers for a transactional purpose,
right?
You're what you just described might be an experience for 300 or 400 people,
right?
And when you start creating that experience so that it's for another club down the street, now maybe you're creating an experience for 1,500 people, 1,000 of which aren't even members at your club. So it's a challenge, but I think it's an incredibly powerful opportunity, because you can hyper focus on very specifically, your group, your culture, who's coming in, who's kind of moving there. And we talk about this all the time. And that might not be for everyone, and it shouldn't be for everyone, because if it is for everyone, then it's basically for no one, and then it's watered down and generic, and you've lost that opportunity to create something really experientially powerful.
I think a lot of people take pride in saying when you walk through their facilities and they go, yeah, this is like a personal version of Lifetime Fitness, or this is a personal version of Four Seasons, and they feel pride in that. And in my opinion, while you might want to have the aspiration of it feeling as nice as the Four Seasons, you don't want to be the Four Seasons, because the Four Seasons is transactional. To your point, the Four Seasons is one night, and you don't really remember each one that you go to. You go there because you're doing something else. And so I think that clubs get stuck in this, like, we're a part of hospitality, but you're more than that. You're a part of someone's memories and lifestyle, and you have this great opportunity to not think like other organizations. You have this amazing, I think that probably Lifetime Fitness or all these other places wishes they could be more like clubs. And clubs wish they could be more like those facilities. And so it's just this backwards thing. The grass is always greener, I guess. But it's really an interesting dichotomy.
Is the grass is always greener your key takeaway, or is there something else that also rises to the top?
I think for me, the key takeaway from this conversation is a lot that has to do with identity guides a lot of things. And I go back to that idea around identity as an operating system. It's not just the way you visually express yourself, but it's the way you consider your experiences. It's the way that you consider hospitality at your club. It's the way that someone gets greeted, but it's also the way that you look at your facilities. Like, it is your operating system. We are about X here, and that guides everything that we do. That is powerful to me. And that leads to success, in my opinion.
Well said. Let's end there. Great conversation. This was a fun one. Looking forward to the next one. Thanks for joining us, everybody. Talk to you soon.
Thank you.
At Susner, we help private clubs build brands that create belonging. If this episode resonated with you, please share it with someone in your club world. And until next time, let's create something worth celebrating.